A former Ole Miss employee is suing the university's chancellor over her alleged wrongful termination, which she believes violates her First Amendment right to free speech.
That right to free speech surrounds a repost she shared over the death of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk. Action News 5's Caitlin Miller drove to Oxford, where she's learned what the community is saying about this case.
I'm here at Tarask, the restaurant owned by John and Lauren Stokes, the former Ole Miss employee who says her termination has impacted her life in a number of ways, including this one. Tarask had to close for 2 weeks and now requires security because Stokes says she received a number of death threats. It all started on September 10th when Lauren Stokes reposted a photo following the death of Charlie Kirk, the founder of Turning Point USA, on her private Instagram. Stokes' lawsuit says that once she realized her post had offended somebody, she removed it and posted an apology a few hours later. The next day, when Stokes arrived at Ole Miss, where she worked as an executive assistant, the lawsuit claims she was told she was being placed on administrative leave, quote, in her best interest. That was at 9 a.m. By 11:50 a.m., she was told the university was asking for her resignation. By 12:50 p.m., she was fired. Roughly 20 minutes later, the university's chancellor, Glenn Boyce, issued a press release about the firing, condemning her, quote, reshared hurtful, insensitive comments. Now, Stokes is suing Chancellor Boyce over wrongfully terminating her for expressing views on a public concern, something the lawsuit says the university does not have the right to do. I spoke with one community member at Tarask who preferred to stay anonymous. They told me they believe Stokes' firing was in some ways hypocritical.
I think a lot of comments were made, and to hold her to a different standard than other professors that made other sided opinion comments, I think it's just disappointing, and I hope the best for her.
For Trip Robold, an Ole Miss student, he says his disappointment was elsewhere.
I do personally feel like the firing was correct. I think, honestly, just voicing your opinion about how you wish death and that you won't support or pray for somebody after losing their life, no matter their political views, I think that's just something that's just wrong morally.
I heard mixed opinions like that from many students, with some feeling Stokes' firing was just and others believing it was unconstitutional. Now, the court will decide. We did reach out to Lauren's attorney, Allison Mills, who sent over the lawsuit, as well as the university, who we're still waiting to hear back from. In Oxford, Caitlin Miller, Action News 5.
Now, the lawsuit comes just 1 week before Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica, and the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, are scheduled to speak at Ole Miss. Charlie Kirk was originally scheduled to be the speaker at Ole Miss before he was shot and killed in Utah. The event is hosted by the university's Turning Point chapter. It's happening next Wednesday, the 29th, a week from today, starting at 6:30 p.m.